My name is Ken Chislett. I was a member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the Canadian Security Intelligence Service for 35 years before retiring. I brought in an Enfield Mark II revolver that was issued to the Northwest Mounted Police. Well, I obtained the revolver through a trade with a friend of mine. It's a .476 caliber. It was dated 1884.
The Northwest Mounted Police was formed in 1873 to support the Dominion of Canada's desire to expand into its northwestern regions. During this time, Sir John A. Macdonald's government feared American annexation without a swift push of Canadian federal law into frontier territories. Instead, the expansion ignited feelings of resistance and protest among First Nations communities in the regions, leading to the Northwest Rebellion of 1885. In the years following, enforcing public peace between new settlements and Indigenous communities came one of the NWMP's primary responsibilities, along with multiple civic duties, criminal investigations, and regulating the Klondike River during the gold rush. In 1920, a post-war merger resulted in its reorganization, and along with its eastern counterpart, the Northwest Mounted Police became the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Ken, welcome to Militaria. What can you tell me about this piece of Canadian history that you brought?
This here is a Mark II Enfield revolver, and it was one of the guns that was issued to the Northwest Mounted Police in 1884. They originally came from the British military where they carried them and were surplused over to the Northwest Mounted Police. The serial number of this gun is stamped right here, as you see. But it was a .476 caliber. It fired about a 276 grain bullet with 18 grains of black powder, which gave it about 720 foot per second muzzle velocity, which is not very much. Then it's double action. You can pull the trigger and fire it that way, or you can single action and do it both ways.
Very nice.
A single action firearm, it requires the hammer to be cocked and then the trigger pulled, the cowboy pistol sort of thing. A double action is where you pull the trigger, the hammer will come back, rotate the cylinder, then fire. The most modern revolvers are all double action.
Ken, what could you tell me about the service length of a firearm like this?
Well, those guns came into service in 1882 till about 1887. They got replaced by Webleys, but the Northwest Mounted Police and the RCMP were never big on giving up stuff. They hung on to it. Some of them were still carried by members. The last known one that was actively carried was by Inspector Fitzgerald, who was the head of the famous or infamous Lost Patrol. From the early 1900s to the 1920s, there was a tradition to ship mail and correspondence from Dawson City in the Yukon up to Fort McPherson, and it was done by dog team in late winter. And in 1910, the commissioner of the RCMP, or the Royal Northwest Mounted Police at the time, decided to do it the opposite way. So it was going to originate in Fort McPherson and go to Dawson City as opposed to the opposite way. So the guide they used was a guy that did the trip one time before, coming from Dawson City, and they engaged a local Indigenous guide in McPherson to take them down certain ways. So they got to a certain point. The inspector in charge of the expedition, Fitzgerald, dismissed that guide, thinking that the original guide could get them the west way home, but he couldn't find the route, he couldn't find the river to follow. And they finally ran out of food. Very severe cold, -40, -50 degrees, 65, and they perished in 1911. And they found the bodies later on. They went looking for them and they managed to track them down. One of the interesting facts of these guns, not this particular one, but I don't know, was it fired the first fatal shot in the Northwest Rebellion, the Riel Rebellion in 1885.
The area that we're talking about was in the Red River area, what we now call Manitoba, was owned by the HBC company. They decided to sell the land to Canada, but a lot of the people that were living on that land were Métis, who were of Indigenous and French and English ancestry, and they wanted a say in how that land was to be dispersed. In 1870, Louis Riel started the provisional government in order to get rights for the Métis people who inhabited the land at the time. Once the Canada militia was sent out to try and quell the 1870 Red River Rebellion, Louis Riel took off to the United States. He left for many years and performed some legal work within the U.S. In 1884, he was contacted by some Métis people that were living in Saskatchewan so that he could help them in their land rights, and it resulted in a conflict that we now know as the Northwest Rebellion. The Canada militia was sent out along with the Northwest Mounted Police, and it resulted in 3 battles: Duck Lake, Cut Knife, and Batoche. Louis surrendered himself to the Canada militia and eventually was executed by hanging. This revolver could potentially have been used in the Northwest Rebellion.
Yes, it could possibly, because it's certainly got the proper date.
A very important piece of Canadian history that you have on the table.
That's the thing about these pieces, you're holding history in your hands.
Absolutely. I mean, I find this fascinating. I think More Canadians should find this fascinating because it's not just the firearm, it's what it represents for us as a nation. I think the artifact that was brought in today is a good example of an historical artifact that really illustrates what early life in Canada was like and the treatment of our Indigenous populations. Louis Riel in Canadian history is infamous or iconic, depending on how you look at it. He was an individual of mixed blood, Indigenous and French. He was educated. He was actually sent to a seminary to study and did not end up becoming a priest. He was deeply involved with Métis rights and felt that the Métis people should have a say in the creation of Manitoba. With the selling of the territory by the HBC to Canada, the Indigenous population wanted a say in how the land was going to be divvied up, and they wanted their rights, and they wanted their rights respected, and they wanted a say in the future of Canada. Louis Riel was fighting for Indigenous rights in the 19th century, which in a way he was ahead of his time. Some people might say, well, it's just a revolver, but really if you dig a little bit deeper into Canadian history, there's some really great stuff there, and I would encourage all people to delve a little bit deeper into Louis Riel and the rebellions. It's a fascinating topic. I have to say, I really appreciate you bringing this in. What are your plans for this?
I plan to hang on to it. It's part of my history too, as a former member of the Mounted Police.
Mm-hmm.
Having joined in 1973, 100 years later, but I'm going to keep it for my son for the time being. That's where it goes now.
Okay. Wow, great. I hope it occupies a place of prominence in your collection.
Yes, it does, yeah.
Yeah, it's a beauty. Thanks for bringing it in.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Yeah, my experience with Andrew was great today, and I know Andrew from the past, so it's always good to get together again with him. It's a significant piece of Canadian history and a significant piece of Royal Canadian Mounted Police history. This was with the originating group that became the RCMP, and it played a significant role in a turbulent